So I think we'll make a start. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Great VM Reset. So my name is Kerry Thompson-Roberts. I'm a Senior Product Manager at Wavenet. So I'll be hosting today's session. Rising VMware costs are the main trigger for this conversation today, but the bigger question is how we place each workload onto the right platform. So today we'll look at three practical routes. So first of all, obviously moving to native Azure. Second option is around utilising a Wavenet data center platform, and the third option is a mixture of the previous two. So we'll also cover how to access workloads, look at migrations, but also ensuring that the environment stays secure, resilient, and commercially optimized. So Michael Sittig, who's our MS sales specialist, will take you through the options, look at the decision framework, and show some practical examples. So if you can move on to the next slide, please, Michael. Thank you. So before we get into the details then, I'll quickly introduce myself and Michael. So as I mentioned previously, I'm Kerry Thompson-Roberts, a Senior Product Manager here at Wavenet. So my role spans our modern work and services portfolio. So this is where I help connect our cloud propositions across our services, design, delivery, support, and obviously moving on to service management. So I'm joined by Michael, who is one of our Microsoft sales specialists. So Michael works with our customers closely across Azure, Microsoft 365, security, license optimization, and migration strategies. So Michael's main role then is to help organizations turn complex technical and commercial decisions into practical plans. So Michael will take us through the main content today. There will be time at the end for a Q&A, so please leave any questions till then. So I'll now hand you over to Michael.
Thanks very much, Kerry. Hi, everyone, and thanks very much for joining us. There are four things I'd like to leave you with today. The first being a clear understanding of why organizations are reassessing VMware. The renewal may be the immediate trigger, but it's important to consider the wider picture, including hardware lifecycle, resilience, operational capacity, your data center strategy, and the need to modernize. Second, I'll give you a practical way to think about the workload placement. Rather than just assuming every workload should follow the same route, we'll compare native Azure, data center platforms, hybrid designs, and specialist transition options. The objective is to identify the most appropriate destination for each workload. Third, I'll explain what controlled migration should look like. This includes discovery, dependency assessment, target design, representative pilot, phased migration waves, validation and rollback, and finally stabilization. Each stage should create evidence, reduce risk, and provide a clear decision point before you move on to the next stage. Finally, I'll show you how the value of the migration can be sustained afterwards. Moving a workload is only part of the outcome. The target environment must also be monitored, protected, recoverable, and supported whilst being continually optimized. As we go through the session, I would encourage you to consider one question. What is creating the decision point for your organization? Is the VMware renewal, aging infrastructure, resilience, limited internal capacity, or a wider modernization objective the key decision point? The answer will then help us to determine what should be assessed first and what options would deserve the closest consideration. So before we discuss the platforms themselves, it's worth identifying the problem that's actually creating the decision. For some organizations, it's the renewal quote because of the Broadcom acquisition and their changes in their licensing strategy. A lot of people are seeing vastly increased VMware renewal pricing. So for others, it's aging hardware, resilience, or that shortage of specialist capacity. The answer matters because a renewal-led assessment may begin with cause and utilization, while a resilience-led assessment may begin with recovery requirements and dependencies. So again, which of these is creating the decision point in your organization? And that gives us the right starting point rather than just assuming the destination. This is the commercial trigger for the whole conversation. Since Broadcom acquired VMware, the licensing models have changed in several important ways. New licensing is all subscription-based rather than perpetual, and the measurement has moved towards cores rather than simply the whole processor itself, and they've implemented minimum core requirements. Finally, the product catalog has also been consolidated into a smaller set of offerings and bundles. And that matters because if an organization only uses a subset of the stack, vSphere being the hypervisor and just vSphere, they would then end up paying for a broad spectrum of products that are part of the bundle that they're not going to utilize. And if their servers have fewer cores or are lightly utilized, the minimum core rules can create paid capacity that doesn't actually reflect the workload demand. And because the model is subscription-based, the commercial decision repeats at renewal rather than being mainly an annual support conversation around the license that you already own. I'm going to avoid using an unsupported headline such as every customer sees this particular percentage increase, because I've seen customers who are utilizing a broad spectrum of products and switching across to a bundle has resulted in maybe a 5 to 10% increase. But then I have seen other customers with a 200% increase. So the impact is estate specific. The reliable approach is to complete a core and entitlement audit and compare the renewal quote with your actual utilization, and then compare that with model credible alternatives. The financial pressure is real, but the business case must fit each individual customer's evidence. Our point of view is cloud right and not cloud first. The first decision is the workload. We need to understand how important it is, which other systems it depends on, the utilization pattern, latency and performance needs, where its data must reside, and whether the application vendor supports the target platform. There are a lot of legacy products out there that customers use that won't really work too well on cloud, as an example. And how much change the business can tolerate. Only then do we really select the platform. Native Azure may be the best fit where elasticity and modern services with global reach are important, but a Wavenet data center platform may be stronger where demand is stable, control and predictable capacity matter, or those legacy applications and dependencies make public cloud less attractive. Hybrid can be appropriate where the estate genuinely contains both types. And the third element that's often missed is the operating model. Before the migration, we'd need to agree on who monitors the platform, how security is managed, how backup and recovery are tested, how the cost is governed, and how changes are then controlled. A technically successful migration can still create a badly governed and expensive environment. Our role is to help make the destination and the lifecycle work together. These are the four routes that I recommend we plan around. The first being native Azure. That could begin as a rehost onto Azure virtual machines, followed then by selective modernization. The second being the Wavenet data center route, using a shared cloud, dedicated private cloud, or co-locating your existing hardware into our data center, depending on the workload. The third is hybrid, where those two destinations are combined intentionally. The last one, Omnisa Horizon, formerly VMware Horizon, would require a totally rebuilt Azure Virtual Desktop Service rather than a direct platform migration. And then finally, there is also the Azure VMware Solution. It's still available, but it needs specialist validation. AV36 retires on the 30th of September next year, and AV36P and AV52 will then retire in June 2029. So with those retiring, it makes AVS a temporary potential bridge, not really the default destination. And for that reason, I'm not going to be presenting Azure VMware Solution as an equal long-term destination this webinar. It can still be used as a specialist bridge where speed and minimal application change outweigh the lifecycle concern, but it keeps VMware in the architecture and would still require node and licensing checks. Our principal story will stay around native Azure, Wavenet data center, or hybrid. The principle is simple. Place each workload according to its characteristics. not according to a single cloud policy. A customer-facing application with seasonal demand and a roadmap for APIs, analytics, or AI is a strong native Azure candidate because the value is not just in hosting. It's access to scalable infrastructure and managed services. A conventional Windows and SQL application may also fit Azure, but we would assess the license eligibility, right-sizing it, backup and recovery, and networking costs rather than just assume the answer. A stable line of business virtual machine with fixed demand and little appetite for application change may be commercially and operationally better on a Wavenet data center platform, and the same applies to legacy applications and specialist dependencies or local performance requirements, particularly whilst a replacement plan is developed. A common hybrid example is digital and customer-facing services in Azure with a constrained core platform hosted by Wavenet. That gives each workload the right home without forcing unnecessary change. Azure VMware Solution appears here only as an exception, and it may support an accelerated bridge for a large VMware estate, but where the node lifecycle, portable VMware Cloud Foundation, licensing and capacity model, and clear onward exit are understood. Omnisa Horizon, again formerly VMware Horizon, needs to be treated as a service transition. Microsoft says that there's no direct migration path for traditional virtual desktop platforms because AVD requires a completely different control plane architecture. We baseline the users, applications, profiles, how many concurrent users there are, and the experience. We then design a landing zone, identity, network, host pools, and images. The new service is then built and proven with representative users before phased cohorts move. Parallel operation, communications, and rollback with a fixed exit date then reduce risk. VMware can support sizing, detailed design, and ongoing management. Native Azure is most compelling when you want more than just a hosting substitution. The first benefit is agility. Capacity can be changed without a physical hardware procurement cycle. The second is the modernization path. A workload can start on an Azure virtual machine, but over time the customer can consider managed database, integration, analytics, and application services where the business case supports it. Good example would be migrating a SQL virtual machine across to Azure and then considering migrating the data onto Fabric. The third is alignment with Microsoft native controls across identity monitoring, security, backup, and governance. Fourth is commercial flexibility, but that flexibility must be managed. Azure can be very efficient when resources are right-sized and appropriate commitments are used, but it can also become very expensive when oversized resources, idle services, zombie resources, and premium storage or unmanaged growth are just left unchecked. That's where Streamline 365 strengthens the route. Wavenet's service translates Azure telemetry into prioritized recommendations. It can identify idle or oversized resources, potential reservation opportunities, your spending trends, and any anomalies. It can help with tagging and subscription health issues and secure any configuration gaps. And that all supports evidence-based decisions throughout the lifecycle, rather than just relying on a one-off migration estimate. Wavenet can then combine the insight with engineering and managed service capacity to implement and sustain the improvements. The Wavenet data center route is not simply a fallback for workloads that can't move to Azure. It can be the strategic decision for stable, predictable, and constrained workloads. You can use our shared cloud model, a dedicated private cloud, or co-locate your hardware into our data center depending on how much control and isolation you require. The benefits include predictable managed capacity, support for legacy dependencies, and a service wrap covering connectivity, monitoring, backup, and lifecycle management. Hybrid takes that logic further. It accepts that a modern estate may contain different workload types. A customer can move digital services and modern data platforms to Azure, and then retain stable core systems on a Wavenet platform, and that keeps a small number of local services where there is genuine dependency. This also enables a phased VMware exit rather than a high-risk Big Bang migration. The key is consistent governance. Wavenet can provide one operating model across Azure and hosted platforms with common service reviews, security, monitoring, recovery, and change controls. Streamline 365 then adds the detailed optimization visibility for the Azure component, whilst Wavenet's engineering and managed service teams provide the practical capacity to act on recommendations across the wider hybrid estate. Engagement is deliberately staged. We begin with a baseline, not a migration commitment. The customer then receives enough evidence to decide which workloads should retire, which should remain, which should move, and which should be modernized. The design is proven with a representative pilot before the wider wave begins. Each migration wave has owners, acceptance criteria, and rollback. Once the service is stable, management and optimization continue against agreed measures. This means the customer can make a controlled decision at each and every stage rather than just accepting a single high-risk program from the outset. The migration starts with evidence, not a target platform. During discovery, you should expect us to inventory your estate, capture utilization over a representative period, map your dependencies, and identify application and business owners. This is also where we find obvious candidates for retirement, consolidation, or replacement. There's very little value in paying to migrate a server that no longer provides a business service. The second stage is assessment and placement. We first test technical readiness for native Azure and Wavenet platforms, model the current cost baseline, and calculate the target operating cost. This includes infrastructure, licensing, connectivity, recovery and backup, security, and management. Each workload receives a recommended route and the rationale behind that recommendation. The Azure VMware Solution would only be considered where there's a specific bridging requirement and documented exit plan. The third stage is design and governance. Before moving anything, we define landing zones, networks, security, backup and recovery, etc. And for Azure, we'd also agree management groups, subscriptions, tags, budgets, and policy controls. You'd then leave the stage with a target design, migration backlog, wave plan, risk register, acceptance criteria, and an agreed operating model. Once the decision and design are complete, delivery begins with a pilot. The pilot should be representative enough to test the architecture and operating process, but manageable enough that risk is controlled. We run test migrations, validate network and application behavior, test recovery, and confirm cutover and rollback procedures. This gives the customer evidence before a larger wave is then attempted. The migration is then delivered in waves. Workloads are grouped by dependencies and business impact, not simply by server count. Each wave has named technical and business owners, a change plan, communication plan, acceptance criteria, and the rollback route. Data replication is completed, the cutover is executed, and then the application owner validates the service before the wave is closed. After cutover, stabilization is essential. Wavenet provides early life support, and we confirm monitoring, backup, and alerting, resolve any migration issues, and safely decommission any old resources only after agreement. We then compare the actual cost and performance with the model that we put together. For Azure, Streamline 365 can then support ongoing identification of right-sizing, idle resources, commitment opportunities, and any anomalies or security improvements you might want to make. Migration success means that the service is stable, governed, and supportable, not merely that a virtual machine is starting in a new location. Our value is the connection between advice, delivery, and ongoing operation. During the assessment, we provide discovery, dependency analysis, readiness, route selection, and commercial modeling. During design, we bring together the Azure hosted infrastructure, connectivity, identity, backup, and recovery, rather than treating the virtual machine as an isolated component. During delivery, we manage pilot migrations, wave planning, testing, cutover, rollback, and early life support. After the move, you can then choose from advised, monitored, or fully managed service models, depending on your internal capability, and we could also put something bespoke together for you if you prefer. The differentiator I particularly want to highlight is optimization. Streamline 365 uses safe read-only access to translate Microsoft 365 and Azure telemetry from the Microsoft Graph API into prioritized recommendations. It identifies wasted Azure spend, idle or oversized resources, reservation opportunities, spending anomalies, tagging and governance weaknesses, and security posture gaps. It uses this to support executive-ready, evidence-based conversations rather than just generic recommendations. But the dashboard alone is not the outcome. Wavenet can provide the engineering capacity, service governance, and commercial guidance to validate and implement the changes. Regular service reviews then track cost, security, resilience, and roadmap priorities, and that's how the customer avoids replacing VMware with another environment that gradually becomes oversized, insecure, or difficult to manage. Streamline 365, as I've already said, creates consolidated visibility across 365 and Azure, including the license use and Azure spend trends. Where Azure is selected, it establishes your initial costs, including the history over the past year, security and governance baselines as well, and then helps measure whether the expected benefits that's being recommended are being sustained. The service also helps to identify unused or misaligned licenses, idle or oversized resources, and reservation opportunities. And then it highlights your Microsoft Secure Score, any identity risks. It'll help with device life cycles and multi-factor, whether or not any Entra IDs are set up with multi-factor authentication, and governance gaps, and whether or not any devices are following the Entra policies that you've set. The outcomes are a prioritized executive-ready review. You can then act internally or ask us to help validate and implement the recommendations. The important point is that optimization becomes an ongoing discipline rather than a one-off exercise. The successful migration does not remove the need for day-to-day operation protection and improvement. We can help provide monitoring, alerting, incident and patch support, change support across your target estate. Protection includes backup, replication, recovery planning and testing, security operations and reporting. Optimization includes cost and capacity reviews and streamlined 365 insight, governance, tagging, and managing improvement backlog. You can choose advised, monitored, fully managed, or bespoke options depending on your own capacity and capabilities. And the value is a single accountable partner across Azure, AVD, Wavenet data centers, Microsoft 365, security, connectivity, business continuity, all of the above. These 4 examples here show 4 different starting points and the same evidence-led approach. Royal Holloway had legacy dependencies, and oh, by the way, you can find each of these case studies on our website. So Royal Holloway had legacy dependencies. They support complexity and a large data center footprint. Wavenet and HPE used Discovery to create a right-sized DHCI and GreenLake platform with reported reductions in footprint, VMware sockets, and energy use. Platform Housing Group needed to address aging infrastructure, resilience exposure, and over-provisioning. Wavenet delivered a modern HPE platform with stretched cluster availability, integrated backup, and monitoring. JCB Finance needed a more scalable and resilient platform for a 24/7 digital model, while reducing the burden of infrastructure maintenance. Wavenet supported the move of its infrastructure and applications to Azure. NHS Sussex Partnership needed to transform a legacy compute estate within budget. Wavenet reviewed more than 300 servers, assessed different cloud models, and helped select a community cloud design. The common thread is not a single destination. It's Wavenet's role in understanding the pressure, assessing the estate, and selecting the appropriate route and supporting the resulting service. This approved Wavenet example shows why workload level decision-making matters. The customer was a legal firm moving from a hosted practice management system to a software as a service platform. The active application was ready to modernize, but the organization still needed secure access to historic case information. A simplistic migration strategy might force the active service and the archive into the same target. Instead, the requirements were separated. The active service moved into software as a service, gaining the benefit of the modern platform. And then the historic data was migrated onto a virtual machine hosted in Wavenet's Nebula data center, where it could remain available on a proportionate managed platform and be accessed from the new service. The value is not that one destination won. The value is that each component received the right treatment. The active workload modernized, the historic requirement retained only on the infrastructure it needed. The customer avoided carrying the whole legacy platform forward simply to preserve the archive. This is the same logic we apply to VMware estates. Some workloads should be retired, some should move to software as a service, some belong in native Azure, some fit to Wavenet data center platform. The best roadmap separates those decisions and connects them through a managed operating model. Our recommended next step is a route-ready VMware assessment. We begin with evidence, the host and core position, current entitlements and the renewal quote, virtual machine inventory, utilization, dependencies, business owners, current operating cost. This allows us to separate the commercial pressure from the technical reality. We then test the planned routes. Native Azure is assessed for workloads that benefit from elasticity, Microsoft integration, or modernization. Wavenet shared or private cloud is assessed for stale legacy or control-sensitive workloads. Co-location is considered where customer-owned infrastructure remains appropriate. Hybrid is designed when the estate genuinely needs more than one destination. Azure VMware Solution, again, is only included where there's justified transitional need, compatible node availability, and that clear exit plan because it's going the way of the dodo. The customer receives a workload placement recommendation, current and target cost model, target architecture, the migration wave plan, a risk register, and a proposed operating model. We also baseline the Azure opportunity and streamline 365 where appropriate, so that further optimization and security priorities are visible from the start. My closing question is, which pressure is driving your review today? Is it the renewal quote, a hardware refresh, resilience, internal skills availability, a data center exit, or simply modernization? That answer helps us decide which workloads to assess first. I'm now going to hand you back over to Kerry, and thank you again so much for joining us.
Okay, thanks, Michael. We can now move on to any questions that anyone's got. If anyone does want a more detailed conversation after the webinar, then please do reach out to one of the Wavenet team and we will happily arrange a follow-up with you guys. Any questions, anyone?
I guess not.
We obviously covered everything, Michael.
Yeah. How often does that happen?
Okay, if there's no questions for anyone, we'll move on to closing the session. So thanks everyone for joining us today. We do hope that you find the session useful and that you've got a bit of a clearer picture as to the options available to yourselves. And hopefully that gives you confidence towards the next steps that you need to take as an organisation. So thanks again for your time today, and everyone enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Cheers.